The title of this presentation is Coupling Biological Intelligence with Architecture, a Biohybrid Approach. And just to give a little bit of background, as mentioned, I've been researching at CETA for the last 12 years. CETA's research remit is really looking at how it is that digital technologies transform the ways in which we think, the ways in which we design, and the ways in which we both produce and occupy architecture. Alongside our research territory, we also have a 2-year master's program called Computation in Architecture. To start the presentation, I'd like to begin by offering two different paradigms of goal-directed material accumulation. Here, what you're seeing is metal processing occurring in Salzgitter. The ingot that you see there, this is the third time that it has been heated. It's being processed by a machine that uses 50 megawatts of energy, one of 3 on the assembly line here. And I'd like to compare this to this as a goal-directed material accumulation approach. This is a 3D scan taken over time of a foliating bonsai. And we see material being placed very specifically into positions that start to transform the object, but do so in a resource-balanced way that has a positive environmental impact. And the question I'd like to pose by putting these two against each other is, which is more intelligent, given a context of human-induced climate change, resource scarcity, loss of biodiversity, the prospect of mass extinction in species? Which of these two paradigms is actually the most intelligent? So the question is rhetorical. And it frames the research that I've been conducting over the last 6 years, looking at the ways in which we can start to not mimic biological systems, but actually couple them and harness their intelligence together with technological systems. What you're seeing here is a controller that has developed through machine learning the switching of environmental stimuli to enable the plant to hit prescribed targets. And this is with a use case in mind of actually using the plant, weaving it into a triaxial configuration, as you see on the right-hand side, to start growing structures over time. We can also think about plants in terms of connecting them into closed loop systems for environmental control. In this, a continuation of the project Flora Robotica, which was an EU-funded project, our partners Cybertronica showcased this system where they were able to train a plant to learn how to switch on a light when it needed light and how to switch it off when it needed shade. So this idea that that there is a certain level of plasticity and ability to learn within distributed and decentralized organic systems, I think really opens up some fascinating opportunities in terms of both research, but also in terms of integration in architecture. Moving on to another EU project, Fungal Architectures, that I'm a principal investigator of. Here, one of the key questions is looking at the idea of living networks as computing devices. And there is actually quite a substantial amount of literature that starts to look at specifically ideas of network topology as ways of being able to implement Boolean functions. So in fungal architectures, we're focused on the use of mycelium, not only in the production of fungal composites, but also in fungal computation to start building fungal constructions that embed properties both of dead mycelium but also living mycelium. So in terms of this idea of how it is that we can think about mycelium and its networks as computing devices, part of this revolves around really understanding the types of networks that we're working with. This requires confocal microscopy of living fungal colonies. That data set has been provided by our partners, University of Utrecht, as a Z-stack of images. At CETA, we've then processed those images to generate a 3D graph. And once we have the 3D graph, we can start to analyze topological features and identify where it is that we can implement specific kinds of logic and therefore particular kinds of processing circuit. Our partners at the Unconventional Computing Lab in Bristol have taken this fungal colony also and run some spice analysis on this. Spice analysis being an analysis of looking at analog computations in simulation to start understanding the propagation of signaling within the network and how it is that Boolean logics can be implemented in those ways. This all starts to lead towards understandings of how it is that we can leverage that kinds of intelligence in the context of an artificial environment, i.e. architecture. And this is where we're starting to find very interesting commonalities and links between the construction logics that we're using with Kagome weaves and the fact that they're based on particular topologies, and how it is that those topologies start to affect distributed systems of computation, as in the case of this cellular automata. So our real kind of research challenge is how it is that we find a deep integration between how it is that we can leverage the intelligence of the living organism, but also find ways in which the spatial organization, the topology of the architecture can also lend character to the type of computation that's occurring. So the question becomes not only about material leading to particular kinds of structural form language, as we've seen in the work published by Heisel and Philippe Bloch with their mycotree project, but how it is that this can be further extended into understanding spatial form as actually having computational capability. Now, of course, all of this work really moves into challenging some quite fundamental orthodoxies of architectural practice. One of the key ones is this idea that in architecture, we work with a specified inventory of materials. And of course, working with living systems that grow, that change over time, really challenges this idea of a predetermined inventory of materials and systems and qualities. It also challenges this idea about, as Robin Evans describes in his translations from drawing to building, the idea that representation really, one of the roles of representation is about providing a complete determination in advance. And of course, if we're dealing with living systems that are continually unfolding over time, this idea of being able to predetermine their states is really challenged. And this kind of segues into the idea of roles of digital representation. In the world of BIM, this idea of the complete determination in advance has been taken to the absolute pinnacle, where for a highly complex building, you can understand it down to the last screw and nut. When we're dealing with ideas of living architecture, this idea of being able to represent a single complete determination in advance is really challenged. And then the final challenge, I think, is this idea that as architects, we are concerned about designing fixed images and endpoints. This slide here, where on the side of the Elbphilharmonie opening, it says fertig, complete, finished. Well, yes, from the architect's point of view, but this is really at the point where the building starts to begin an entire new life where we are guaranteed that there will be changes over time. So this idea of designing an endpoint, I think, is really a convenient myth. One of the great lies we tell ourselves as a profession. And the idea of working directly with the idea of living architectures really opens up this question of trying to understand buildings over their entirety, over their entire life cycle, where there isn't necessarily a separation of discrete phases between design, construction, and occupation, but that these might be intermingled across the life cycle of a building. Thank you very much.